Loren Bouchard, you are the creator of Bob's Burgers, an Emmy-winning comedy, very funny comedy, and a very widely liked show. I was wondering, one of the things I'm wondering about this is how this show is taken off, and what was the first indication to you that this show had really gone into another realm of fandom?
You know, it's wherever we are exactly, which is hard to say in terms of the realms of fandom. It's hard to pinpoint the first time, but I will say that something did shift. It was around the summer that we won the Emmy. There was something that felt a little different. Generally speaking, you know, I've done this type of work for a long time, and generally speaking, I accept and completely am comfortable with the fact that no one ever knows the shows that I work on. That is just a perfectly fine way for me to go through life, and I never expected otherwise. I would just sit down next to somebody at a wedding, and they would say, what do you do? And I would say, I work in animation. And they would say, what show do you work on? And I would say, home movies. And they would just nod and smile, and that was fine. And something did happen with Bob's where all of a sudden that conversation would happen wherever those kinds of conversation happen, and they would say, oh, I like that show. And then also I did notice this funny thing with kids where, you know, we didn't originally make it for kids. You know, it's a family-friendly show, but we weren't expecting 8-year-olds to watch it or younger. So things started to happen. I have young kids, and somehow, like, some of these kids in the preschool started watching, I think, with their parents maybe. So I had a few experiences that were exciting because it told me that people were watching, but they were also problematic because it was parents sort of giving me anecdotal evidence that their kids were repeating things that they heard on Bob's Burgers, and it was causing problems.
I'm just curious, which kid was it that's causing most of the problems?
It's, you know, it wasn't a kid. It was Tommy Geronda. This one story that I'm thinking of in particular, this very nice parent at preschool said, come here, I want to tell you a story. And I came over and they said, our sweet little angel was on the back porch as loud as he could, yelling, I'm good at sex, you're bad at sex, I'm good at sex, you're bad at sex. And we rushed outside and saw all the neighbors watching him, and we calmly asked him, where did you hear that? And he said, Bob's Burgers. This parent wanted to tell me this, and I wanted to hear it, and I understood suddenly two things. One, that we had perhaps a responsibility to these families that are letting their younger kids watch it, and I'm one of those families. And also that more people were watching, that it was getting seen.
So one other thing that I think is very striking about the show is how characters come in and they have these not only are the characters great, but you also have this like on point voice talent voicing them. Just this past week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess I should say, we saw one with Chris Parnell playing this character from Bob's high school days that we had never seen before, and the casting was just completely perfect, having Chris Parnell play this type of character. Is there a certain process that you go through when you're thinking of new characters and how to cast them?
It varies. I mean, overall, casting for me is best done earliest. You know, the show itself, we cast Bob's Burgers before we started writing. There wasn't a, you know, wonderful, snappy pilot script, and then we went out and auditioned actors. This was find our cast, think of who we want to work with and whether they'd be good together, and then create characters for them. I'm talking about the original cast. On a good day here, for a guest character, that works that way too. We start very early, we'll break a story, and we might talk about casting while we're breaking. And that way, when that character's getting fleshed out, when the beats of the story are getting broken, you're actually thinking of an actor. It doesn't, of course, it doesn't always work out, and sometimes we are passionate about an actor, but they're not available. So there, you can work it from a couple different angles and still have a successful sort of casting experience. I would say, the second guiding principle is to cast people who you think really want to be there. We don't care at all about name recognition or celebrity. We are simply motivated to cast funny people who we think will be game. Who we think will be excited to be in the booth, generous with their time and their, improv if they're so inclined, and that's what we're looking for, is somebody who wants to be in the room with the rest of this cast.
And specifically about one who was actually on board very early, I think from the first season. How did Kline come about into the process?
No, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So weird. Even those of us who've worked on the show for all these years, and I assume even for Kline himself, it must be weird that he's on Bob's Burgers. It happened through two channels. It was, I think, our casting director knew his manager, and then at the same time, Eugene Merman had attracted the attention of Kevin Kline's kids performing in Brooklyn.
Wow.
In New York. And so there was this sort of just couple little vectors that brought him and us together. But of course, it comes down to him wanting to do it. And he is incredibly willing to do Bob's Burgers. We just recently wrote a very short, sort of a walk-on, cameo for Mr. Fischoeder, or I guess it's not a cameo if you're a reoccurring character, but he just had to come in this one episode and deliver this, one piece of information that if they didn't find the rotten egg that was stinking up the apartment, that he might have to burn the whole building down. And we were very self-conscious about inviting him to be part of the table read and scheduling the recording session, because of course it's just one scene. And I reached out to him and sent him a note and said, don't feel pressured to do this table read. Obviously, it's just one scene. And he said, of course I'll do it. There's no small scenes. And that is, we were so lucky to have him, because he's perfect for that part, and he's perfect with our cast, and he's incredibly funny, and I love his voice. But we're also lucky to have him because he wants to be there.
Yeah, he just brings, from the moment that character is first introduced, he provided such a great, just with little accents to his voice, just provided so much to that, brought so much to Mr. Fischoeder that just encased him perfectly.
Yeah, he's the perfect guy for that role. We had this sort of, all we had in mind when we were thinking of him was Willy Wonka. That was the germ of Mr. Fischoeder, and to get Kline is we were really lucky.
Well, speaking of casting for the show, one of the things that I always find really funny is the fact that you have two main female characters on the show that are voiced by men, and they're both wonderful in what they do. Dan Mintz playing Tina, who I think has become kind of a feminist icon over the years, and John Roberts as Linda the mother. How did that come about?
John Roberts, again, a case of casting first. I had seen his clips on YouTube. He created these shorts where he was essentially doing his mother. He put on her sweater and this crazy wig and these huge glasses, and he did the tree, this incredibly funny sort of one-person show of a mother just trying to get the kids to come appreciate the Christmas tree. And then he did a few others, again, just sort of him in this mom drag doing this character. So that was, I knew that voice would be powerful. I knew if it wasn't going to be in Bob's, we were going to use it in something else. It was very appealing, and we simply reached out to him and said, would you loan us that voice and that persona? And he said yes. So he was always going to be the mom, and we knew exactly what that was going to sound like. With Dan playing Tina, there was one step in between. We cast him as a boy named Daniel. We were originally going to have 2 kids. It was going to be just Eugene and Kristen. And then Jon Benjamin was writing on the Dimitri Martin show, and he said, there's a writer on this show. Every time he talks, the rest of the writers laugh. You should try him as a voice. And that is why we wrote a 3rd kid, the oldest boy, Daniel. While we were in development, the network, I think correctly said that character isn't as clearly defined as the other 2 kids. He's interesting and he says funny things, but he's not popping the way Gene and Louise are. And because we had John Roberts playing Linda, because we'd done this sort of gender switching in the past, because you can do this in animation, and because of something in Dan's voice, we got the idea to keep Dan right where he was, keep all his dialogue, keep almost everything about his personality that we'd already established in the pilot, and to make him a girl. And we did a little test, and we also used some of Dan's stand-up. We did 2 tests, but just little talking head Tina, one with some of the dialogue from the pilot, and then the other one with a couple jokes from Dan's act. And we sent them to the network, and to their credit, they were on board and excited. And we sort of lucked into this great character, Tina, because they were picking at this Daniel character.
Yeah, I always find it funny. I still meet people who don't realize that Linda I can kind of understand, but don't even realize that Tina is voiced by a guy. And I'm just like, I don't understand how they could miss it, but it still blows my mind. Do you still get that?
Well, I mean, I have this great experience of, when we do Bob's Live or when we do Comic-Con, what's really fun is to, we do our introductions, everybody sits down, and at some point or another, we finally get Dan Mintz to speak. And we actually have to build in a pause because no matter what he says, there's this sort of ripple of excitement and sort of titters in the audience because that voice is coming out of his face. And so I just, it's fun to see that. And, and it's fun, of course, when he does his stand-up, you get that for 10 minutes. When we do Bob's Live or when he goes out and does stand-up, I think that Tina fans get almost have an out-of-body experience because they're watching this 30-something-year-old man with Tina's voice coming out of it.
What was Dan's reaction when the character was changed to a female character?
Dan was understandably nervous because I called him, and I think he felt like this was the call, like that he was getting fired. And I get it. You're an actor, and we didn't know each other that well at the time, and he knew we were in development and we were getting close. And for some reason, I think he just decided that I was calling to tell him that that we were replacing him in that role. I tried to give him that impression, but he has told me since that that's what he was sure I was calling about. And so I think when I told him that, or I asked him if he would be willing to play a girl, I think he was so glad that he wasn't getting fired that he barely even thought about any of the implications of what it would be like to play a girl. And so he just jumped at it, and I think rightly so. He's got a really wonderful voice for any sex or gender, and he's just a spectacular Tina, and hopefully he knew he could do that from the beginning.
He's not only a spectacular Tina, he's a spectacular Deena as well. That it has to be one of my favorite Tina lines is when she's Deena in the food truck episode and she goes, "Time for a new voice. Tina talks like this. Deena talks like this." It's the exact same. But
it's her barrette on a different side.
Exactly. And it was priceless. One of the other amazing things about this show is this rich depth of supporting characters that you have that can come in. And, you don't necessarily, they're not in every episode, but they're reliable people that can come in and have great stories on their own, even separate from the family. Sometimes the family is just even tangentially involved. How did how do those come about, and I guess also what I'm asking is how was there a conscious decision to have that kind of depth of characters in the show beyond the family?
There were two guiding values, and they're almost contradictory. I mean, one is to expand the world whenever possible because of the pleasure of world building. And I mean that for both of us. I have the nerdy pleasure of expanding this world in the thinking about Wonder Wharf, and we make little maps. It might as well be Dungeons and Dragons. We're the dungeon master, right? And we're just coming up with what's around this, who lives there, where are they exactly. Who is the lunch lady? Who's the company that supplies the food? Those plot points that are sometimes come from story, and sometimes just come from needing to fill in some texture. It's a great pleasure for us, and I like to think, because I'm a fan of going back years of shows like this, of animated shows and half-hour shows that take the trouble to do this. I think the pleasure for the audience is important. When you sense a carefully constructed world as an audience, I think it's so fun. You just relax into it. You say, that's great. That's where the Wonder Wharf is. That's where the Ferris wheel is. I know that place. I feel what they're going for there. I knew a place like that when I was a kid. The more believable and lived in we can make it, I think, the more fun it is to watch, and it has a ripple effect. Jokes land better and stories track better. And you're on solid ground when you really believe the place. And that has a lot to do with the characters. That said, I don't like it when shows go too far from their main characters because they're bored. That's a great temptation for writers to kind of be like, well, we've done 20 or 30 stories about a family. Like, hey, let's go off and tell a story about someone else. What my experience has been as a fan is that those can come too soon. For the writers, you live in the world day in, day out. You're up to your ass in this world, and so for you, like a story about that follows the health inspector, or that follows Aunt Gail, or that goes off and has a different character at its heart, maybe really a nice break and interesting. For the fans, I actually think we need to resist that until it is absolutely organic and imperative that it's a story we want to tell. So, for example, when we finally tell a story from Teddy's point of view, we want to earn it. We want Teddy to have become so lodged into people's hearts that he might as well be part of the family. Then we can tell a story where the story is really a Teddy story and the emotional stakes are his. But even then, we keep our family as close to the center as possible, even in these exceptional cases where we tell somebody else's story. So for the most part, Gail's had some really strong emotional arcs, and Teddy has, but they earned that right. Mostly we try to keep our family right in the middle. They're the nucleus of this thing, and everything is a spoke off of that. So you sort of contrast the urge to build outwards combined with hopefully a strong gravitational center.
It kind of reminds me of how The Simpsons kind of built up that depth of character, and then they were able to do an episode like 22 short films about Springfield, and explore all these different characters, even if they weren't related to even if the stories weren't related to the family, but still the family in there. But it's still like one of the most widely loved episodes because it explores all these characters. And I'm convinced you could do something like that at this point with Bob's Burgers, and it would still be just as compelling and funny and interesting.
It's nice of you to say, and I certainly hope that's true. We're going to go there very carefully. That's all. I'll say that. I don't want to be the show that started just shooting out into the outer atmosphere of the world and just picking and choosing characters. Hopefully we can only do that when it's really, really needs a story that needs to be told.
And I have to say, two of my favorite supporting characters on the show are first of all, regular size Rudy, I think, is just a joy whenever he is on screen. He is just magnificent, and the actor who plays him just delivers the lines. Even if he has just 2 lines in an episode, he just brings the just perfect attitude towards both of them.
Brian Husky.
Yeah, and the other one that I love is Marshmallow. I love that Marshmallow just will pop up, and just I love that Jon Benjamin will go, "Oh, hey, Marshmallow." That's my favorite.
Yeah, Marshmallow is almost like a god in our world. She comes in and out in sort of it floats in and out and just seems to have some kind of magical effect on Bob. And yeah, Brian Husky as regular size Rudy. That's a great instance of where we loved the character. We were so excited that worked out when we introduced him in the Carpe Museum episode, and we were so entranced by Husky's performance and by what that character did for Louise. She was sort of protecting him at the end, and so we immediately started writing more. He showed up in everyone's script. I had everyone up and down the hall was pitching me stories, with regular size Rudy in them. But what's so satisfying, and obviously some got in and some didn't, but what's so satisfying is when that episode finally aired, and we sometimes might, I will admit, we kind of hang around on some forums and check and see what people are saying. What was so gratifying is the fans responded to him exactly the way we did. And so that's such a nice feeling of being in sync with your fans. Everybody seems to like the same stuff.
And so I also want to ask about some of the stuff you did before Bob's Burgers. You've been working in animation for quite some time. How and you've been working with Jon Benjamin for quite a while. How did your working relationship with Jon Benjamin start?
Yeah, to be clear, I've been working only with Jon Benjamin. I have never worked on a show that Jon Benjamin isn't in. He is my career. I just hook my little cart to his horse, and that's that. And if it keeps going this way, that is absolutely fine with me. I have no desire to find out what it would be like to work on a show without him. He was living in Cambridge when I was working for my boss, Tom Snyder, at his company. And he and Jonathan Katz created Dr. Katz Professional Therapist. What it first existed as was 7 one-minute shorts. I was lucky enough to come on as a 23-year-old kid working for Tom, doing anything he asked me to do, including helping to edit the audio so for those 7 one-minute shorts. We got them animated, all in Cambridge, all in Watertown there, I should say, and they aired on Comedy Central as part of Short Attention Span Theater, and Comedy Central wanted to do a half hour. They wanted to expand it into an animated half-hour show. They had very little programming at that time. This was a very early days of Comedy Central. They were doing a lot of those, clips of stand-up comics. It was the MTV of stand-up comedy, on some level. But they were just beginning to do half-hour stuff, and they were interested in animation. And, of course, this was a fit for them because the patients of Dr. Katz were going to be stand-up comics doing their acts repurposed as therapy. Jonathan Katz and Tom Snyder were wise enough to see the very basic, simple kind of rules of sitcom creation, which is, let's find out who Dr. Katz's family is. And in this case, they thought, well, maybe he just has a son, a 25-year-old son who still lives at home, and the mom is out of the picture. And so it's just these 2 men sharing this apartment. And Jonathan Katz wanted to cast his assistant as well, his receptionist, and a little bar that he would visit on the way home from work. And that was it. It was going to be a very small cast. He was interested in Jon Benjamin. He'd performed with him in Cambridge and in Boston, and knew that he was funny and that he had a good voice. And then Laura lived with Jon Benjamin at the time, and Jon Katz liked the fact that whenever he called over there, Laura was rude to him on the phone. So we got it all at once. It was one package. Jon Benjamin and Laura Silverman sort of auditioned, which is to say we invited them over to record. We had built this little studio in Cambridge. We never auditioned anyone else. To call it an audition is, I don't know, it's not quite accurate. We were enamored of them. We knew we'd found great people, and we were really off to the races. Jon Benjamin and Jonathan Katz do something in Dr. Katz that is extraordinary, I think. Whether they're improvising or reading scripts, and they did a lot of both, they were incredibly sweet with each other. And they also were very, very facile at handing back and forth the role of being straight man. They could do it within a scene several times. They just were naturally generous actors and had a good instinct for that. So Jonathan could be funny, and then Jon Benjamin could be funny, and the other knew how to support them, and they also cracked each other up, and we could use it. We were able to keep the idea of these two guys cracking each other up, and we sort of looked at each other and we said, well, this works. This is in character. They're laughing in character, even though they're really laughing. So we got lucky. It ran for many years on Comedy Central, and we felt really fortunate that people wanted to watch the show. It was no secret. I am never surprised when people say to me, the relationship between Dr. Katz and his son is what made that show really special. We felt that too. We loved all the comics who so generously loaned us their material and let us, make them into patients on this show and illustrate their comedy. And they certainly didn't do it for the money. But what Jon Benjamin and Jonathan Katz and Laura Silverman were doing was the show, was the heart of the show. Jon and I got to be friends, and it just seems, for me, a great place to start a project is to think of what I would want to do with him. We did it again in Home Movies, where he came in as this soccer coach and as this 7-year-old kind of third wheel to Melissa and Brendan. And yet again, he completed the chemical formula of the cast and made that show work at its to its highest potential. I've done a couple pilots with him. I've done a series for Adult Swim that only ran one season. I just think the amount that he's willing to do voices for me is exactly the amount that I'll take.
Yeah, and to your point about the relationship between Dr. Katz and his son, I always thought that Jon Benjamin was Jon Katz's actual son. Because the relationship, you could just hear in the voices, it was uncanny and it was sweet, but it really was something really special. And that is the thing I always remember about that show. And with Home Movies, again, he would never want to hear me say this because he's too cool to admit how good an actor he is, but he's an extraordinarily natural actor, and he does it in a way that makes other people good too. That kind of acting that somehow infuses a scene and makes everybody better. It's really impressive. And you also mentioned the other show that you were a part of with Jon Benjamin, Home Movies. Could you briefly talk about how that came about? Because I found that was a really fascinating show for me. Oh, good.
It was Dr. Katz was still on the air and had run for several seasons, and we began to get interest from other networks. They thought, well, do you want to do an animated half hour for UPN? Do you want to do an animated half hour for FX? We did very well with fledgling networks and smaller networks. That was sort of, the people who were most interested in us. And we got to a point, very lucky, still in the end of the 90s in Boston, where we had a couple pilots, offers on the table. And my boss said to me, why don't you take this one? Why don't you're ready. Why don't you try and run it, create it? And he also gave me some advice at that time, which was, but try and find, I should back up. And right away, one of the people we were working with at the time was Paula Poundstone. She was the judge on a show called Science Court that we were doing for Saturday morning.
I remember that show.
I loved her voice on that show. I loved working with her, and I knew a little bit about her life. I only ever directed her over the phone, but I knew that she had adopted these kids, and so I was interested in her playing a mom and having young kids. That was the germ of home movies. Tom Snyder said to me when we were beginning the process of developing this thing, he said, don't forget the power of the guy who lives in Boston, the way Jonathan Katz lives here. He said, if you can find a guy who lives here to play one of her kids, and he can be the guy who's going to come in and do heavy lifting for you, you'll really probably be doing yourself a great big favor, since we were in Boston, to have your voice actor close at hand, one of your leads. And so I went hunting very consciously, looking for that guy, and found him in Brendan Small. Brendan was performing in Harvard Square. I knew it the second I saw him. We struck up a relationship very quickly. He was incredibly hardworking. He was an incredibly good writer. He was a great musician. So it was kind of easy from that point on, and maybe not so much for him, but I could just sense that he was the right guy to be a co-creator with, and I was lucky to have him. And then we fit in Benjamin because we knew we wanted to have him as a part of this. The soccer coach appealed very much. I think it was Tom Snyder's idea again. And Melissa was producing with me. She was helping me produce the show, but when she and Brendan and Jon Benjamin were in the room together, they had a very funny relationship. They sort of big brothered her, but she sometimes kind of turned it back on them, and they were teased each other in a way that I really enjoyed. And so we asked her if she would be part of the show so we could try to capture some of that chemistry. And of course, she has a great voice and can think on her feet. So that was it. We had our chemical formula. Paula Poundstone is the mom. She ended up leaving us after 5 episodes, and we were able to plug in Janine DiTullio, who is also incredibly talented and funny and knew what to do with that role. So we got lucky. A lot of this, my story, has to do with luck, by the way. I'm just a lucky schmuck. The Adult Swim, was interested in home movies even after UPN canceled it hard off of UPN after 5 episodes, but Adult Swim put us back to work.
Well, where's UPN now? You can take solace in that at least.
I'm not dancing on anybody's grave here. I feel nervous about that. Superstitious.
Well, speaking of luck, or at least speaking of good fortune, as we talked about earlier, Bob's Burgers now won an Emmy 2 years ago for Outstanding Animated Program, beating out The Simpsons, beating out Archer, I believe, beating out, I think, South Park as well. A really hefty lineup with a great episode, Mazel Tina, just a fantastic episode. What was the experience like? Now, I know you weren't there with the rest of the staff of the show, but what was it like finding out that you guys had won? And what was the reaction from the staff like when they told you when they were telling you about that evening?
It's one of those things. The daring to want to win one of those, wanting it is almost toxic. You don't want to want it because it gets so complicated and sort of painful when you don't win. And, we were nominated the year before. And so, we've been to the show, so to speak. In this case, just to show you how superstitious I am, I was not aware of the scheduling of that Creative Arts Emmys. I think they moved it up. I had already booked a little rental on Cape Cod to be on vacation with my family. Of course, my first thought was, well, I'll fly back to be at the Emmys. But then I was so worried that it was a jinx. And I'm not superstitious about other things. I'm not like, the walking under the ladder guy or the black cat guy. But I really, for some reason, when we got into doing Bob's, got real superstitious about certain things. And I thought, shoot, I I could fly back for one, take a red eye, leave my family, fly back to LA, go to the Emmys and lose and feel kind of horrible and maybe like I'd wanted it too much, or I could stay with my family and win or lose, at least perhaps. Well, I knew if we won, I would feel happy and I wouldn't. It was not about me. I didn't need to be there. I'm happy that a staff was there, and and that did end up happening. I was just sitting on the porch in Cape Cod having dinner, and these, the text started coming in like crazy. There was a lot of I think people who were handing the phone around backstage, and of course, nobody wants to talk. That's the awkwardest situation to be in, the guy who's being handed around on the phone. But everyone was very happy, and I was happy too. And it's a big deal. It was a big deal for us, I should say. It was a big deal. And it's hard to define exactly what that award means and why it's such a big deal. But it did feel like it had a big effect for us. It put a lot of wind in our backs.
Yeah, and as I said before, I mean, you guys have been pretty good about picking episodes to go to the Emmy voters on the animation ballot, because when you submit for the animated series, when you submit for the ballot to be nominated, you actually submit with an episode. And the first one you were nominated for was the great episode Burger Boss, which also was the introduction of Daryl, by Aziz Ansari. Which had that great animated sequence where Bob completely loses it and everything turns into 8-bit video games. Yep. And then the next year you had OT, The Outside Toilet, which is one of the most brilliant episodes ever, because Gene is my favorite character. I actually think Gene is kind of my spirit animal in ways a bit. And that was so wonderful. And even though you guys got nominated last year again with Can't Buy Me Math, another wonderful episode. Have you thought about what episode might be going forth for Emmy voters this year?
Yes, we picked it. This year, you're going to screen, please, an episode called The Horse Riderer. The Horse Riderer, in which Tina rides a real horse for the first time. And it does not work out the way she planned. It's got a heart in it that is so sweet and profoundly appealing to me anyway, and I hope to other people that it was. This one felt like we had to do it almost from the beginning, from the table read. I personally thought we should submit this one. Part of what happens is she feels she should say goodbye to her imaginary horse Jericho. We reveal that she seems to have had a years-long relationship with an imaginary horse named Jericho, who's played by Paul Rudd, voiced by Paul Rudd. Beautiful black horse that just appears in her room, and that's I won't say anymore, but that is what gives the episode its especially satisfying body.
So that episode has not aired yet, has it?
No, but very soon. What is it? I think what's that? The 15th.
Oh, okay. All right. I cannot wait for that then. Yeah. And Tina episodes seem to be pretty good for you, since that seemed to be your key to winning last time. So I cannot wait for that. That's an awesome scoop that you gave us. Are there any other animated shows on right now that you think? I think animation is at a lot of people talk about that we're going through, another golden age of television. And I think animation has been really key to that, with some amazing animated shows that know how to take advantage of the medium. Shows like Archer, BoJack Horseman, and definitely Bob's Burgers. Are there any other animated shows that you watch that you're particularly a fan of, that you think are really helping to enrich the medium?
It's a good question. I'm not watching as much as I used to, and as much as perhaps I should. I've got young kids, and they watch a lot of animated movies, so I'm enjoying the what's going on with animated features these days. That's also there's a lot of good stuff out there. That's really fun, and of course it's fun to see it through their eyes. I would say this: I think we all can do much more. I think we can do even better. I think animated comedy in particular and animated shows in general are poised to really break out and really surprise people. I don't know why there hasn't been people taking more cracks at animated drama or animated horror. I don't think it's gonna be easy. I feel for the people who undertake that challenge. I think it'll be tough, but I think people could do it, especially on premium cable or something like that, or on a Netflix, where you can tell a longer story. I'm excited to see the next generation of animated TV shows. I think there's so much more to be done in terms of storytelling and in terms of tone. I worry that people who are doing it are coming in behind some of these huge shows like Simpsons and Family Guy and South Park and trying to do that tone, but those guys do that tone. You know what I mean? They're good at that because that's their voice. And I think if I'm sort of speaking to the you guys out there right now who are developing your animated half hour, I would just say, you don't have to do that tone in order to do animated comedy.
Well, also like what you were saying with some of the characters on your show, like you think about what South Park is doing now and where they started. It was people would just look at it as just crass fart and poop jokes, which was a good part of it, but it's really earned that tone that it has now, some 20 years later.
That show is incredible, and I think it's been incredible since the beginning. I mean, I know they themselves talk about their bad seasons or whatever, but I as somebody who just dipped in and dipped out across the length of that show, I'm just dazzled. I think they're so good at what they do, and they've always had, I thought, more there behind. I'll speak for them lightly and mostly for myself. I think those of us that are lucky enough to do this for a few seasons, we don't think our show has changed. You know what I mean? The fans can often, I think, see an evolution that in some ways I almost don't want to see. It might be easier for us on some level to imagine that we're doing the same show that we did since episode 1.
Well, Loren Bouchard, I cannot express to you how thrilling this has been for me and how much of a great interview this has been. Thank you so much for letting us talk to you, and we wish you all the best coming up for this Emmy season.
Thank you. We'll take it. Nice talking to you too, Joe.